Welcome to the Fritt Ord Foundation and this event on free speech in academic life. My name is Knut Olav Åmås and I'm the director of the Fritt Ord Foundation. I would like to mention to you that this event will be filmed and the recording will be published afterwards on the web. So you are most welcome to say or do things you regret, but they will be taken care of for eternity. I want to start with a quote by Kenan Malik from last year's T.B. Davey Academic Freedom Lecture at the University of Cape Town. He said, "The university is a space for would-be adults to explore new ideas, to expand their knowledge, to interrogate power, to learn how to make an argument. A space within which students can be challenged, even upset or shocked or made angry. To be at a university is to accept the challenge of exploring one's own beliefs and responding to disagreement." Unquote. Tonight we are going to explore strong tendencies which might be threatening this ideal. And please let me introduce at once our distinguished speakers. Greg Lukianoff, at the first row here, it's hard to find any individual who has done more for putting the topic of free speech in American campuses on the agenda. He's an attorney and the president and CEO of something called FIRE, a very appropriate name. FIRE stands for Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. He's also author of important books such as Unlearning Liberty, Campus Censorship, and the End of American Debate, and also Freedom from Speech. Freedom from Speech. and he co-authored The Atlantic's September 2015 cover story, The Coddling of the American Mind. He contributes regularly to American newspapers and is a blogger for the Huffington Post. And he's also an executive producer for Can We Take a Joke? A documentary that explores the collision between comedy, censorship, and outrage culture on and off campus. I'll introduce also Flemming Rose at the first row here. He served as Jyllands-Posten's correspondent in Moscow for several years, then as the newspaper's culture editor. The 30th of September 2005 is a date many of us will remember, and Flemming more than any other, when he published and printed the Mohammed cartoons. And I should have liked to say that the rest is history, but in a way it is, but in so many other ways it's not. The cartoon controversy is still with us, as some of you might also have noticed when arriving at this house tonight. Flemming was Jyllands-Posten's foreign affairs editor until recently. Today he is an independent journalist and author, giving lots of lectures, taking part in public debates around the world, and he's attached to the Cato Institute as an adjunct scholar. He has written several books, among them Tyranny of Silence, and has also received a few awards, but surprisingly few, in my opinion. I think that could say something about the burning nature of his topics. He received the Fritt Ord Honorary Award last year, and the perhaps even more prestigious Milton Friedman Prize for Advancing Liberty this year. Ragnhild Øien Guldvog, at the first row here, is a chair of the Norwegian section of Scholars at Risk. Scholars at Risk Norway has 18 members, all the Norwegian universities and a number of university colleges, and also the Norwegian Association of Higher Education Institution. and Norwegian Students and Academics International Assistance Fund. She works as a senior advisor at the Department of Research and Development at the Oslo and Akershus University College of Applied Sciences. Just a few words now, a bit more context to our topic. We are going to discuss the free speech situation in universities and other parts of the academic world. And this is perhaps not a topic on top of the agenda in, at least in the Norwegian broad public sphere. And we would like to contribute to changing that. There are so many problems to discuss, so many symptoms. Let me just give you 4 short examples. What sorts of political and commercial pressure is there towards free scientific research and priorities done by the institutions and their staff? For example, connected to climate research, the aquaculture industry, and the oil and gas industry. Secondly, what is happening now in Turkey after the attempted military coup? And what are the consequences after thousands of academic staff have been sacked? Third example, in a number of American campuses, lecturers claimed to be controversial, had their invitations cancelled, and students discuss so-called microaggressions and speak in favor of so-called trigger warnings. We will hear more about this from Greg Lukianoff. And we see some of the same tendencies in Europe, but not yet that visible and strong. Fourth and last example, Flemming Rose had his invitation to give a prestigious guest lecture at the University of Cape Town cancelled recently. In fact, the same one which Kenan Malik gave last year and which I quoted from. It is entitled, as I mentioned, the T.B. Devi Academic Freedom Lecture. Academic Freedom Lecture. The Vice-Chancellor in Cape Town argued that Rose's appearance could provoke conflict and create security risks. Well, this leaves me almost speechless, almost. So I'll leave the floor to our guests. We'll hear first 2 longer speeches by Greg and Flemming, and then a shorter speech by Ragnhild. And then we will have a very short conversation in the panel, and then most of the time will be dedicated to dialogue and discussion with you in the audience. So please, Greg Lukianoff.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm here with my wife and my baby, here dressed as Batman, of course. Very, very popular American figure. And thank you so much for having us. We're having a lovely time. We're doing the same talk tomorrow in Copenhagen. This is my first time in Scandinavia, and it's been just wonderful, and the hospitality's been fabulous. So I'm going to try to go relatively quickly through a couple of topics because I actually do enjoy the question and answer period the most. I think that's when the most interesting things come up, and you get a sense for what people know or they don't know. But I'm a First Amendment lawyer. I do teach First Amendment law, and I just wanted to go really quickly over how strong the protections of the First Amendment are in the United States. They're pretty unique globally when it comes to the protections of free speech we enjoy in the U.S. because of the First Amendment. And this is, of course, its famous text. It also includes, by the way, freedom both from state-imposed religion and the freedom to practice your religion as you choose. And also, of course, various protections of freedom of speech. Now, this is something that people can take.
Freedom of comprehension, you're too quick, you're too fast.
Oh, I'm speaking too quickly. Oh, wow. Okay. I will slow down. Never been good at that. Okay. So, Okay, so the First Amendment, passed in 1791, includes freedom from being, from having the establishment of religion imposed against you, and the freedom to practice your religion. But it also has comprehensive protections of freedom of speech in the press. Now, interestingly, it was not interpreted strongly in the United States until 1925. I can definitely go into that history if you'd like. But then this is primarily because, for one reason, that the American tradition of freedom of speech was so strong that in a lot of cases it never even got to a court of law. There are exceptions to this, of course. But you start having, as of 1925, the Supreme Court interpreting the First Amendment quite strongly. And you have some wonderful opinions, including, this is, in my opinion, a hallmark, one of the great, proud decisions in American history. In the middle of World War II, during, obviously a very terrifying time for the U.S. and for the entire world, there was a movement across the U.S. to require school children to pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States flag, and that's how they saluted it. Of course, very creepy as far as Americans are now concerned, the way they were asked to salute the flag. But this was a very popular law. But nonetheless, the Supreme Court, in the middle of a huge struggle, said, listen, it is not our job to compel what shall be orthodox in politics or religion or nationalism. They went beyond a mere protection of the freedom of religion rights of students who had religious objections to saluting the flag, and said that simply it is not the government's job to decide what you should think. Basically, that's what we think the bad guys do. I think this is a very patriotic decision, and if you ever want to read law as poetry, please read the West Virginia Barnett opinion. It also includes the very wonderful line, "Freedom to differ is not limited to those things that do not matter much." Very clarifying, and I like to repeat that a lot. So it took a little bit for this to be interpreted on campuses, but when it did get interpreted on campuses, the Supreme Court, and this is right around the time of the Red Scare in the U.S. This is actually towards the tail end of the second Red Scare in the U.S. When it was brought in front of the Supreme Court, they said, made mince no words about it. They said teachers and students must always remain free to inquire, to study, and to evaluate, to gain new maturity and understanding. Otherwise, our civilization will stagnate and die. Powerful. You might argue a little melodramatic. But the Supreme Court has shown that it really believes this, that it really believes that the stakes are this important when it comes to higher education. And I'm going to show you how far they go. This is a 1973 Supreme Court case in which a campus activist named Barbara Papish was angry that her student group had been beaten up by the police protesting during the 1960s. And after these police officers were exonerated, sounds familiar to some of you who know the current state of politics in the US, she protested, not through violence, not through stopping traffic, but through publishing this cartoon of cops raping the Statue of Liberty and the Goddess of Justice. Now, the fact that this is offensive, when this came in front of the Supreme Court, they looked at this, and that was a non-issue. The Supreme Court immediately understood that, to be clear, I forgot to mention, the student who published this was kicked out of her school, University of Missouri. She was kicked out of school for publishing this because it was found to be so offensive. She went all the way, she brought her argument all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court had no problem putting together that you have no right to be free from a speech that offends you. And when people brought up the fact that this was offensive, you could hear the sort of collective brow of the Supreme Court furrowing. They didn't understand what you're talking about. She is trying to hurt the feelings of the police here. She's trying to gravely insult them. That's the entire point, but without using actual violence. So this is the law of the land. This is the law of the land in the US, that speech even this offensive is unquestionably protected on public college campuses in the United States. And this is what I have to deal with every day. Now, I know, scary looking cover, but if you can read the actual text at the bottom, this is a book about when the Ku Klux Klan marched on Notre Dame in 1926. Now, people forget that the Ku Klux Klan also hated Catholics. They were sort of equal opportunity in that respect. So they marched on Notre Dame, and they were defeated in a street fight by Catholic students at Notre Dame. So it's this raucously anti-Klan book talking about the bunch of bigots getting their getting beaten down by Catholic students in a street brawl. So again, a gleefully anti-racist book. But a student was found reading this at a public university, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, known as Ooey Pooey, bound by the First Amendment, and he was found guilty of a racial harassment because one employee saw this cover and, literally judging a book by its cover, reported him to an office where he was not afforded a hearing, and he was found guilty of racial harassment. So this is unquestionably protected speech. This is not a close call. But when he went to talk to professors about, will you help me, they all said, just lay low, just don't raise your head. The fact that you're now listed as a bigot on your transcripts is no big deal. And it actually took the combined effort of FIRE, the American Civil Liberties Union, and the famous Wall Street Journal in order to get this university to fully back down. Again, this is not a close call when it comes to law. And it's for cases like this that my organization, FIRE, was founded. We were founded in 1999. I'd be happy to explain all of these stories. They're all cases that we've been involved with over the years. We get way too many cases like the one you just saw on a yearly basis. I've been with FIRE since 2001. Just for example, that little gazebo right there is the infamous Texas Tech University free speech gazebo. It is only 20 feet wide, and it is for all 28,000 students at Texas Tech University. God forbid they should want to exercise their freedom of speech. I had one of my friends who has a math degree from MIT do the dimensional analysis of it, and he worked out that if, God forbid, all students wanted to exercise their free speech rights at the same time, they would have to be crushed down to the density of uranium-238. So that's FIRE. And we're joyously nonpartisan, and we're involved in cases all across the political spectrum. The staff reflects that as well. But unfortunately, we have more business than we know what to do with. Now, this is a story that I won't explain for too long, but once again, a student got kicked out of school at a public university in Georgia, in this case, for publishing, allegedly, for publishing this collage that was critical of a parking garage project. This is an environmentalist student angry at a parking garage project by that president. Can anyone guess what the rationale was for kicking him out? What's that?
It would offend the sponsors.
No, they were actually very creative on this. Memorials usually happen when people are dead. So this collage he published on his Facebook feed was a threat upon the president's life. Yeah, nobody believed this. It was amazing seeing the when we took this to court, getting all of the discovery in the case and finding out what all his other staff members said to him about this. It's like, this is, you're not threatened. He'd been trying to kick this student out for protesting this parking garage because previously environmentalists had stopped him from starting his beloved parking garage 5 years before, and he wasn't going to let that happen again. Now, in the end, this was such a clear violation of the students' rights, and FIRE worked with a great First Amendment attorney to get this litigated. They ended up having to settle for about $1 million. It was such a serious violation of his civil rights. It's the story that I open up and explain in my book, Unlearning Liberty. It's a really rich, horrifying story. The student in question, his name was Hayden Barnes. They really picked the wrong student to try to label as a terrorist. He's a Shambhala Buddhist. He's a believer in non-aggression, and he's a decorated EMT. He saves lives, in his spare time, in addition to being a pacifist. So it didn't really stick very well. So more recently, though, you might have heard of this case, or maybe you didn't, but America's anti-sex discrimination law for campuses is called Title IX. And it actually pretty much was just passed so that any universities accepting federal funding would have to admit both men and women. That was the intention of it. That was the entirety of the intention of Title IX originally. It's progressed somewhat into a very strange, large legal beast, so to speak. And Laura Kipnis, who's a feminist professor at Northwestern University in Chicago, where the same city that Barack Obama used to teach, published an article in the most popular journal of higher education called the Chronicle of Higher Education, saying just this, saying that the way we've interpreted Title IX these days is infantilizing to women. It says that we can't take even minor abrasions, say that we can't date whoever we like. This is childish. So she wrote an article saying Title IX is abused and goes too far. And for writing this, she was brought up on charges of violating Title IX. So for 3 months, she was subjected to something right out of Kafka. She wasn't allowed to know who was charging her. She wasn't allowed to know what the charges were. She just knew that she was under investigation for sexual discrimination. Again, a feminist professor. And it was only when she published again in the Chronicle of Higher Education, against strict orders by Northwestern University, saying you're not allowed to take this public. After she took this public, that was finally when the university gave in, because it was bad press. That's the way we fight in most of our cases. Not in the court of law, but the court of American public opinion, which is still, to this day, very pro-free speech in cases like this. Now, what's sad about this case is I can't tell you how many professors have come to me saying, I'm being investigated for saying something in my class or on my blog, but I don't want to fight it because it would look bad. And I always have to explain to them, if you don't fight it, they're going to probably figure out a way at some point to fire you. And I've seen this be right time and time again, so I'm very thankful to Laura for, and this was just last year that this happened, for being willing to fight. So these are actually just a small selection of the cases where speech codes have been overturned in American courts. I actually finally got some additional data and found out that there have been 53 suits against speech codes on American college campuses. Now, what is a speech code? A speech code is an unconstitutional restriction on freedom of speech, very simply. So that includes things like the Texas Tech Free Speech Gazebo, but it also includes vague and broad codes like the one passed by University of Connecticut and the one passed at Drexel University in Philadelphia that banned inappropriately directed laughter. Careful. So generally they ban offensive speech. Generally they ban things that are just too vague and too broad to be unprotected categories under American law. That's a very strong principle under American First Amendment law, that if something is so subjective, you can't open your mouth without risking violating it. It is absolutely unconstitutional. So we set up a litigation project. Litigation is not our primary weapon, but we set up the Stand Up for Speech project. And these are the kind of cases we've dealt with so far. This is a student, this is just 2 years ago. We have a little-known holiday in the US that even a lot of Americans don't know about. It's the day after my birthday, September 17th, and it's Constitution Day. It's the date when the Constitution was officially ratified. And this was a student, he's a veteran of the Iraq War, a very nice, soft-spoken kid. And he is at a public college in California, and he is trying to pass out copies of the Constitution to honor Constitution Day. That includes the text of the First Amendment, of course. And within 10 minutes, he's told that he can't do that without getting permission from the state to do that, which leads to a very frustrating discussion with him saying, you know what I'm handing out, and you know what day it is, and this isn't a real police officer, this is a campus police officer, but nonetheless, no, can't do something like that on campus. And so he goes and tries to get permission from a state employee in order to engage in free speech on a college campus. What she's doing right there is she's looking through a binder to find out if the tiny free speech zone that they have on campus is available that day. Turns out it's not, so no handing out constitutions on Constitution Day, maybe sometime in October. Now, he managed to get all of this on video. And this went all over the world. And the funniest thing about the sort of victim mentality that you see on campuses is the people who have modeled this behavior more than any other group of people are campus administrators. Because they started getting angry emails after this video went viral. And they were mad. They basically blamed us for them getting them. We had nothing to do with this until we took it to a lawsuit. But we had nothing to do with putting this together. And having to explain to them, you're getting angry emails because you told a vet he couldn't hand out copies of the Constitution on a public college campus on Constitution Day. That's going to happen. So we won that case. That was kind of obvious. And just to be clear, this does affect people all over the political spectrum. Not that the previous student was a conservative, he was more of a libertarian. But this is a student who was an animal rights activist. And not only was he told at a public campus in California, where the speech protections, by the way, are considered to be even stronger thanks to the California Constitution, that he had to not only get permission from the state in order to exercise his right to protest the state, and he had to limit himself to a tiny free speech zone that he could not use until a couple weeks after he'd applied for permission to use it. But he had to wear a badge that explained he had been granted by the state the right to protest the state in the tiny little area at Cal Poly Pomona. So we won that one too. These are not difficult cases. In fact, this is a useful pie chart of the number of cases we have won so far, yet nonetheless, campus speech codes persist. So I want to move on to what the new trends are in campus speech codes. And probably the newest trend is what are called microaggressions. Now, have people heard the term microaggressions before? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, well, a little less than half. So microaggressions. Now, I have a British mother and a Russian father. I grew up in sort of an immigrant area neighborhood in the US. I am passionately interested in cultural misunderstandings. I studied it as an undergraduate, and microaggressions are essentially ways you slight people unintentionally, unconsciously obnoxious things that you say to people that might be interpreted as a slight, rightly or wrongly. And this is a theory that goes way back to the 1970s, originally in the context of racist speech. So the perfect example of a microaggression would be someone saying, this African American, he's very articulate, over and over again. Because after a while, that starts to imply that's a big surprise that this person's articulate. That's the classic example in American culture of what a microaggression is. Now, I've gotten sort of labeled as being this huge opponent of microaggressions, and I want to be very clear about this. I think they are an amazing topic to study. The way we slight each other in everyday conversation, I think, should be studied. It should be studied academically, though, critically, figuring out when misunderstandings happen, how we can bridge understanding, how we can actually get people to talk more effectively across lines of difference, because we desperately need to do that. But as soon as they actually start becoming tools that get in the hand of the administration, they start reflecting basically what the largely upper class, usually white ruling class of universities think people should or should not say. So at UCLA and at the whole UC system, massive, one of the best college systems in America, they ban the following, they say the following are tiny forms of violence against the oppressed, including asking people where they are from, saying America is a melting pot, saying that they think affirmative action is racist. I believe the most qualified person should get the job, and America is a land of opportunity. Now, you can disagree with any one of these statements. That's perfectly fine. But as Eugene Volokh pointed out on his blog, so you're saying that I'm supposed to feel comfortable teaching here when the following things that a lot of Americans actually think and say are considered to be tiny forms of violence against the oppressed. And this is what happens when microaggressions go from something being just an idea, just an academic idea, to being put in, being made operational. Even Daryl Sue, Daryl Sue, the person that I quoted in the first slide, explained, no, these are, saying exactly that, saying that these are not supposed to be things that shut down conversation. These are supposed to be things that help people converse more effectively. They're not ridiculous rules imposed from above about ideas you may not have. And this one I always like to point out at University of New Hampshire. This is a sort of quasi-microaggression policy that came out around the same time. And now, it includes healthy, freshman, mailman, chairman, dumb, elders, senior citizens. That one was really peculiar to me. I didn't know that senior citizens was offensive. Caucasians, I guess because it's just geographically incorrect. Mothering and fathering. So Fox News really got its teeth into this, and I bet you can guess where they got their teeth into it. American. They didn't like American being called so just saying that being a microaggression. Now, I'm actually a little more used to that. I grew up in an environment with kids that were from South and Central America, and they will say, hey, listen, we're Americans too. We're from South and Central America. But it never really was like a hot issue. Nobody got angry about it. Americans, people from the US call themselves Americans, and we have to apologize for that sometimes, but rarely. But the one that made me the most fascinated was the declaration that the term Arab, by itself, is inherently offensive. Now, I grew up in a city that also, I used to work at a Middle Eastern restaurant, and I grew up with a fair number of kids who proudly describe themselves as Arab. And what I find so funny about this policy is that, do you guys ever watch the American version of The Office over here? Okay, so there's a hapless manager trying to deal with his employees. He has one of his employees, one of his beloved employees, is named Oscar, if you know the show. And at one point he asks, Oscar, how do you self-identify? When he's trying to teach a diversity program. Bad idea. And Oscar says, well, I'm Mexican. And Michael Scott goes, ooh. Is there a less offensive way to refer to you? And of course, that's the single most offensive thing you could possibly say. So the recommendation for what you should say instead of Arab is Southwestern Asian? I think of all my Arab friends being told that that's the way you should refer to yourself now? Well, anyway. This policy got shot down as well, but mostly because of the misuse of American. So I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer by practice. I'm a lawyer by passion. I went to law school to do First Amendment law. It's what I've always wanted to do. But I also have a deep interest in psychology. So I wrote this article with Jonathan Haidt. I would love for you to check it out. It's now actually the second most read cover story in the history of the Atlantic, which I'm very, very proud of. And it's about how I think we're doing something greater than legal harm to students. I think we're teaching them distorted ways of thinking. When you have these kind of ridiculous examples happening on a daily basis, you're engaging in what they call in cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive distortions. Now, cognitive distortions are a very common sense idea. We engage in cognitive distortions every time we say to ourselves, if this date doesn't work out, my life is over. Or if I don't nail this job interview, it's kaput for me. Or there's nothing lovable about me ever. These exaggerated voices we have in our head. Now, I refer to cognitive behavioral therapy because it is the most effective non-drug intervention for anxiety and depression of the last 50 years. I read a lot about it, I'm fascinated about it, and I worked with John Haidt and 9 other psychologists on this article. Because what I think we're doing is we're teaching a generation the mental habits of the anxious, depressed, and paranoid. And then wondering why we're having a spike in anxiety and depression, and in my opinion, paranoia, on American college campuses. And it's been funny. If you look at the way you deal with cognitive behavioral therapy, it's simply just that you ask yourself, is what I'm thinking at all rational, or is it an exaggeration? You can conclude that absolutely what I'm thinking is rational or an exaggeration. But as you can tell by the American political scene these days, nobody in America is doing that right now. So I think that this is a nice way to get into the idea of can we at least try to think about what we're saying first, not just because it's better for discourse, but ultimately it may be better for our mental health. So also what's at stake is, this is a great quote from one of the founders of FIRE. You can obviously read for yourself. And I do see this happen over and over again. Students don't even understand. When they hear about a tiny free speech zone on campus, they'll say, oh, are we allowed to say anything in there? And they in some cases, want to legislate what you're allowed to say, even in the tiny free speech zone. So, further info, the things that I have to recommend, this is just something that I do whether Flemming is here or not. If you haven't read Tyranny of Silence, please read it. It is excellent. It is a powerful book. It's a compassionate book. I also make a pitch for my 2 books on learning liberty and freedom from speech. I always feel very liberated to do that because all the proceeds of them go to my nonprofit, not me. And if you want to see the sort of a lighter take on this, I'm an executive producer of this movie, Can We Take a Joke? It features top American comics talking about how you can't really have a funny society and a right not to be offended at the same time. And I'm trying to reach a larger audience. The Atlantic article, that reached a certain number of people. This one I'm trying to get to just Joe Average in the US or Jane Average. And just to make the point that please understand, that 50 years ago, last month, the great comedian Lenny Bruce died. And he died considered a martyr for freedom of speech in America. But he wouldn't last a minute on the modern college campus with his racy material. And I mean that very sincerely. And that's where the movie came from. So watch it. I think I'm very proud to say it's about a serious topic, but I'm so proud of how funny it actually came out. So this is the latest attempt to reach as many people as possible about the message. So thank you so much for listening. I hope I didn't talk too quickly, but I really appreciate it and look forward to hearing Flemming.